What's up, everybody, and welcome to TinkTink.org interviews. I'm your host, Josh Wilson, here today with our guest, founder of Wideload Games and co-founder of Bungie and Industrial Toys, game design extraordinaire, Mr. Alex Seropian. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, I'm excellent, except for finals, so I'm losing my mind slightly, but it's all good. So, what first got you into gaming?
Well, when I was a young lad in probably middle school, I guess, we got an Atari 2600, and my brother and I would play all the time. I'd come home from school and they had a lot of head-to-head games that you could play, which was quite a bit of fun, even though the screen resolution on that thing was like 64 pixels by something. I don't know. It was Atari. So that's kind of how I got into playing games. And then at some point, I started taking all my toys apart, and it was kind of around the same time I got introduced to a computer for the first time, which in our school we had Commodore PETs, which were like had these green phosphor screens, just ASCII text, and they had like the amount of RAM that was each machine had, like on a Post-it note, or taped to the side of the monitor. So they all had like 4K of RAM. And there's like that one machine that had like 16K RAM, which we, for some reason, all like want to have that one because it was 16, even though we had nothing to do with all that extra memory. And so I started learning how to program computers. And then, so the first thing, obviously to do when you learn how to program is to try making a game. So that's kind of how I got into it back then.
So, what's your favorite game and gaming platform of all time?
Well, I play a lot of games. I don't finish a lot of games. So when I do finish a game, it's usually because it's something I like a lot. So the games that I've finished is probably on a short list. Includes things like I was really into Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. Those games were great. Plants vs. Zombies, I've probably spent a lot of time in playing. Portal is a big favorite of mine. And I haven't played as much Super Mario Brothers as my son. But I have a huge amount of respect for that game. Just the way it's so well designed. It's pretty amazing. It still blows my mind. Most recently, a game I've been playing most right now is a game called Kingdom Rush on the iPad, which it's a tower defense game, but it's really well done. Really enjoying that game. So that's from the past up till current. Some of the games I'm enjoying.
So, what made you decide to get into gaming professionally?
Well, when I was getting out of college, I knew I wanted to do something with computers, but I also was very interested in trying to start a business. I've never been really good at working for other people, I suppose. So, the thing that I knew how to do was program. So I decided I would try to start a business where I could program, and I wanted to program games. And so that's what I tried doing. And it sort of worked. I mean, the first game I did, I actually, borrowed some money from my dad and his friends to put it in a box. This was back when video games came in boxes. I sold barely enough to kind of make the money back, and tried again, and the third time it actually worked. So that's how I got into it.
Nice. So your first published game was the Apple Macintosh exclusive Knop, which was a Pong clone. Now, why Pong and why Macintosh?
Well, I guess Pong because it was just something I could do in a weekend. But I had a Mac, and so when I started Bungie, it really wasn't a kind of a top-down market analysis. Where's all the PCs? Let's go raise some money and start a business to take over the world. It was more of a hey, let's try and do something cool. So I was on a Mac, and that's what I knew. That's really as simple as that. It had a pretty nice side effect of being a underserved market. Gaming started back then. It was like back when Wolfenstein 3D and Doom were coming out, and it's kind of like the beginning of the 3D game era and shooters and all that. But those games were mostly on the PC, and Mac gamers had nothing. So when Marathon came out on the Mac, it was it was a real big deal because it was sort of the first game of that kind on the Mac. So the fact that we were on that platform, which was kind of less of the interesting game platform back then, it served us pretty well because the audience was hungry for it.
So how was the development process like for your next game, Operation Desert Storm? Because that was the first one you really sold and made a little money on, right?
Well, the development process was basically, it was just me, and I had a friend who was doing some of the sprites. So it's kind of hard to describe that as a process.
One word: horrible, great, amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty much just started writing code, and when I needed pictures, I'd call my buddy up. Hey, can you draw a picture for 10? And then we'd set that up. And as we kept making games after that, we started introducing like formats and tools and things like that would make it easier for more than one person to work on a game, or to make the games bigger in scale and scope. But back then, it was you could make a game with one or two people in a few months. And actually, that's one of the things that is most exciting to me right now is with mobile. And this is going to change, but like right now, you can make an iPhone game with just a few folks, and it has this very cool, liberating side effect, which is we can do whatever the hell we want. We don't need to go out and fund 50 people for 2 years, which usually when you do that, you have to do something that a publisher wants you to do, or whomever's writing a check wants you to do. But since the scope of these games are smaller, we can take more chances. We can experiment. We don't have to follow trends. We could try to set trends, which is pretty cool.
So how did you and Jason Jones partner up? Was it hey, we both like games, let's do one together type thing, or was it destiny?
Well, Jason and I actually we were in an AI class together at the University of Chicago. We didn't really know each other. In fact, my first sort of encounter with Jason was in an AI class where the professor was saying something like, so you guys could try to work on this project at home if you have a Mac in your dorm room, but you probably won't be able to because you need like 8 megabytes of RAM in your machine. Back then it was crazy amount of memory, and Jason was the guy who's like, oh yeah, I got 8 megabytes of RAM, and I was like, screw you. That was sort of my first encounter with Jason, but we had a mutual friend, and he knew I was working on a game, and Jason was also working on a game at the time, and so we met up, and his game was way cooler than mine, and I was telling him, hey, you should sell that, we should put it in a box and sell it. He didn't want to finish it because he didn't think it was very good, but it was good, and ultimately I convinced him that we should do that. And so we finished the game and shipped. That was Minotaur. That was the first game we worked on together.
So, what made the both of you decide to do Pathways into Darkness? And was innovating the FPS genre for the Mac an afterthought, or was it a goal from the start?
Well, we the first couple of games were interesting, but commercially not super successful. Um, and when Wolf 3D and Doom were coming out, it was kind of it was inspiring from the perspective of, hey, let's do something that we know the kids want, and shooting stuff in 3D was clearly resonating. But as usual, we wanted to do something that had a little bit of story, narrative depth, and layers to it. So, Jason started working on a 3D renderer for real-time 3D renderer for Minotaur, basically. But we shifted it to something that was a little bit less fantasy, a little bit more shooting, and that's where Pathways came from.
So during the development of Pathways, did y'all guys realize that you kind of had something special there?
Yeah, well, it was from the very beginning. It was certainly, I thought it was really cool because whenever back then when you first start seeing 3D graphics, scroll by in first person, that was pretty novel back then. It was very cool. It wasn't until we started selling it and stores were wanted to carry it that we knew it was that it was going to do something. I remember being I was in this basement apartment in Hyde Park, sitting around, and the fax machine rings, and there's this big giant order from our distributor, which I totally was out of the blue, not expecting. We'd never gotten an order that big before ever, and that was hey, wow, this might work. Up until then, it was 50-50.
So the origin of the name Bungie, it's been debated. Some saying it was chosen because it sounded fun. Some people have said that's the punchline to a dirty joke. Could you clear this up for us?
I'm morally, legally, and ethically from discussing the origin of the name. But it's a good question.
Well, good answer, I guess. So, when did the core idea for Halo first form? And was it just some random idea, epiphany, or something? Or was a think tank involved?
Well, it was back after we finished Myth. We started working. We kind of split the team in two. We started working on a sequel to Myth, and then we started messing around with doing a strategy game that would be set in a different universe, and upgrading the engine so that it had 3D characters as opposed to sprite-based characters, introducing physics in 3D space, and doing some interesting stuff like that. So really, the beginning of the game was its roots. The beginning was in the RTS genre, but we had spent many years prior to Myth doing first-person shooter stuff with Marathon. So as the development of that was going on, the characters, units in the world in that prototype were pretty cool, and it was really easy to start messing around with the camera. And every time we moved the camera closer, it looked cooler and cooler because we were doing all sorts of interesting, nifty things with physics and how the game worked. That we just kept wanting to push the camera in closer and closer until there was what the fuck? Let's just make it a shooter. And in fact, because of the evolution of how the camera moved in, it was a third-person shooter at the beginning, and eventually, once we had multiplayer working. The camera just had to keep going.
So it was, like you said, it was an RTS in third person first.
And that's how that's like the evolution of how the prototypes work. Yeah.
Sorry, I just cut you off. I couldn't hear you for a second. But like you just said, it started as an RTS and then third person at first. And did it solely have that many iterations just because y'all thought it was cool to zoom it in?
Well, our process has always been very iterative. We try things, look at it, and try to make it better. So yeah, it was this iterative evolution of messing around that eventually led to kind of a shift from that God view to ultimately the first-person view.
Were there ever any talks of canceling Halo when it was in its infant type stages?
No.
Just going strong from the get-go, I guess. So, when Bungie
got to do something.
Yeah. So when Bungie got bought by Microsoft, did you feel dirty? Like Bungie was betraying the Mac community? Or was it necessary?
No, didn't feel that way. Though we got plenty of enthusiastic and emails from our Mac fans. Not necessarily enthusiastic, like, "Hey, we're so happy that you're joining up with Microsoft," but concern that they may get the platform might be less of a focus. So that deal was great for the company and great for everybody involved, and certainly great for the project. And Halo would never have been the global juggernaut it's turned out to be without the cooperation and help from Microsoft and the result of that deal. But at the time, I think not a lot, but a few like local fans scratched their head a little bit, but we didn't feel dirty.
So what part did you play in the development of Halo?
Basically MO, which is like the management overhead layer. So by the time we started working on Halo, we had 3 teams, around 70 folks. So the business was had a little bit of complexity to it. So really, I was my role at that point was mostly to help the teams with getting what they needed resource-wise, to be able to do things like, hey, let's try this thing, and if it's great, we'll iterate it this way, and if not, we'll rewind and iterate it that way. And building the teams and hiring and creating the culture of the organization so that the creativity and the quality was always at the top of the list as opposed to other things that are maybe shorter term focused. So at that point, that was really my main focus.
So looking back on Halo Combat Evolved now, would you have done anything different about it?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the results, sort of speak for themselves. The game turned out great. We ended up having to make a lot of decisions that were really hard at the time, but in hindsight, it seemed to work out pretty well, which included things like where we located the team. And like I said, we had 3 teams running in parallel, and ultimately we marshaled everybody's focus on the product, which was pretty critical as we were slamming into a very hard release date to coincide with the Xbox hardware release. So in some ways, it's amazing that it all came together when it did, but in some part it was the result of some of those decisions that we had to make along the way, which were not easy decisions at the time. So I'm not sure I would change anything. I think things worked out pretty well.
So what are your views on the Halo franchise as of now?
Well, I still enjoy and play all the games. I think Bungie did a fantastic job. Once I had left the building to go do other things, continuing to move the franchise forward, innovate in that style of game, and now it's out of their hands as well, and the strong, sure-footed grasp of our friends over at Microsoft. And I don't know everything that they're doing right now, but I know some of the folks that are working on it, and they're great, super talented folks. So I have high hopes that it will continue to evolve and innovate in interesting ways. And we'll see. The Xbox platform itself is probably going to evolve in an interesting way in the not too distant future as well. Microsoft's done a great job of getting the Xbox into a lot of people's hands. It seems to be the winner in this latest round of the hardware cycle, and they seem to be set up pretty well for what's going to happen in the next round. It'd be very interesting. A lot of really cool things are happening now that games are starting to be primarily digital and kind of decoupling from the retail structure. The structure of like how much a game should cost, how much content needs to be in a game when it releases, and how it's built and all that kind of stuff. And especially with one of the reasons I'm focused now on mobile is because of that, because you can do a lot of interesting things when you don't have to structure your game and your content for a particular retail channel or for some artificial external force. So I'm hopeful that they'll be able to take advantage of some of that space innovated as well. Be cool.
So when you were at Bungie, were there ever any talks of bringing Pathways, Marathon, Minotaur, Oni, Myth, or any of the other games you had done back in the day, bringing them back?
All the games that we ever worked on were always, we cared a lot about them. We cared a lot about, we just personally spent a lot of time in those universes and making those games. So they're always near and dear to our hearts. The reality, at least during that period of time, and from what I know, keep in touch with the guys even well beyond that. The focus is so squarely upon Halo and the franchise that was bringing a lot of customers in, and the gamers were getting a lot of enjoyment out of it. There just wasn't really the bandwidth to bring back with those properties, and even the attempts to expand into new IP was hard to prioritize those efforts. So yeah, talk, but really weren't able to get any practical action behind it.
So after co-founding Bungie, it's super successful with Halo and some of the previous past games. What made you decide to leave and form Wideload Games?
Well, that's an interesting question. One that I've had some renewed perspective on, having, when we sold Bungie, went to Microsoft. The Microsoft environment there. While we worked really hard to preserve the culture we had at Bungie, Microsoft's just a different company, and I've gone through that cycle again with Wideload and Disney, and for me personally, I've found it a challenge to be in a scenario that doesn't have a lot of room for growth in terms of breadth, and I think I found myself wanting to do a couple of things. I wanted to start a family, so I wanted to come back to Chicago, and thinking about like what the future was going to be within Microsoft. It was, I think, a pretty well-known quantity from my perspective, and I think ultimately my long-term view was to try and explore a little bit more. So, I didn't leave with any particular, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. I left with the, hey, I've taken this company, this team, and this franchise to a really great place, and they're going to take the baton and keep running with it, which they did fabulously. And I'm gonna go back home and start a family, and then think about what my next gig would be. And so I took some time off, started having some kids, and then started Wideload, with the idea that like the game industry had evolved into a spot where it was bigger productions, it was more expensive, it was a lot of risk, and kind of the same thing I was talking about before, harder to innovate in. with those pressures. So wanted to see if it would be possible to create a developer that didn't have to carry all that burden on its shoulders, to be a little smaller, be a little bit more nimble by having a small core team that would work with outside contractors to do all of that asset development, but in the sense be a small, nimble team, but be able to produce games that look like they would come from a much larger team. So that was the idea for starting Wideload.
So you've stated in other interviews that you were frustrated with the game development process. Is that what you were frustrated with? Just the enormity of it all?
Well, yeah, the frustration really was that it's really hard to do something creative. Just in general, it's hard to do something creative. It requires not just talent, but it requires, in the gaming medium, it requires the ability to fail. And you have to, you're never going to get to something innovative and cool without trying a lot of things, and you're going to have to try stuff that's new. And it's not just a creative aspect, there's a technical aspect to it, which is it's hard to predict. And all those things, and when they add up, it's very easy for that sort of mission and idea and goal to butt heads against the realities of bringing a consumer product to market, which is often a lot about timing, it's about schedules, it's about money, and it's and a lot of those things are controlled by folks who are not involved in that creative process. So, at Bungie, when we were independent, all of that was controlled by the folks involved in the creative process. At Microsoft, it was as much as it could be like that. But there was still an external pressure of having to fit into a system. And for Bungie, for us, it was probably a best case because the franchise was so high profile. But for a lot of other developers that were trying to do interesting, cool stuff who were not in that position, it's extremely difficult to manage hey, here's our milestone, which is 1/10 of the way through a game, or 1/2 the way through a game, but it doesn't look like anything. Please give me more money. And a person on the other end of that phone, if they had never been through the process before, more likely than not, would be like, we did it. So that as simple as that may sound, it sounds complicated, I don't know, but that's very prevalent in the game business, and especially since the game business is young, relatively speaking, to other creative media. You don't have a ton of people that have that kind of experience, like a lot of experience, to be able to support that kind of creative searching, to find something cool. That's the frustration, sort of, in a nutshell.
So, Wideload was bought by Disney in 2009, but before being bought, y'all were just kind of talking about partnering up to work on a title. Did that title that y'all were talking about, did it ever see the light of day?
Yeah, that game was called Guilty Party, which is came out for the Wii, and it was a favorite mystery game. It was actually it was a really good game. Very proud of it.
So your latest endeavor is Industrial Toys, which plans to make mobile games for core gamers. What made you decide to go mobile?
A few things. One, I am playing more games on my iPad, my iPhone, than I am anywhere else right now. So from a personal angle, I know that customer because it's me and my family. From a sort of a creative perspective, the mobile game market is at a great point right now where you can do these things that I'm talking about. I've got a team of 15 people in here, and we can fund this game ourselves, and we don't need to take money from a publisher or anything like that. And so we've got our ideas about what's going to make the best mobile game ever, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So that's a bit of creative freedom and flexibility that I haven't had since the beginning of the Bungie, basically. And that's a product of both just the scope of where games are right now on mobile, and also it's a result of the decoupling of retail, games from retail. So because I don't have to hit a certain price point and put a game in a box, I can craft this game to the scope that makes sense for the customer, and I can sell directly to that customer. I can distribute directly through iTunes, and I can build a relationship with that customer. And developers haven't been able to do that in a long time. And then from a business angle, mobile is just a great business to be in right now because the platform is growing phenomenally, and we're just at the beginning of that curve, that growth. And it's not just here, it's global. So just the amount of players that we can connect with, the audience is huge, which represents a great potential for business. So from all those angles, it's just super exciting to be working on games for mobile.
So do you think the mobile market is ready for a core game with all the Angry Birds and other casual games flooding the market?
It is so over-ready. I mean, come on. Like, I run into a lot of people who like poo-poo, like a core game on mobile. But like, you must know a lot of people that play Call of Duty and Halo. Do they have cell phones? Yeah, they all have cell phones. Do they all, like, have you ever looked at what's on their home screen? Are there games on there? Yeah, there are. They all play games. And do you think they want something cool? They won't say no to that. So yes, it is so ready, and that market is so underserved. There are so few good games for gamers on the phone and on the iPad. There's some, but there are not enough. So I'm totally ready. I started the company, so I got to say that, but I totally believe it.
Okay. So how exactly do you define a core game?
Well, there's lots of different ways to define that. I'll sort of define it in the context of what we're focusing on, which is first and foremost a satisfying and visceral gaming experience. So that relates to a lot of components of the game, but really the guts, the mechanics of the game and the controls of the game, the characters of the game, how the camera works. Those fundamental aspects of the game need to feel exciting, tight, really well done, not frustrating, not in your way, but enabling you to basically play the role of a hero or something fun and aspirational that you can do in the game. Right? That's one element of it. Another element of it are just the production values of making something that not just plays really well and is fun and addictive, but looks really interesting and it's just great to look at, and it's great in the audio and all the production value of the experience, the story and the writing is high quality. And the other part of it is depth. What a lot of gamers look for or want, maybe even if they don't know it, is an experience that has enough layers that it's not just candy. There is something to learn from it. There is something to get out of it if you play the game more than once. It does make you think, and that's about building things in layers where you experience the game on its surface just through the mechanics, but if you look around and explore, there's things to find, secrets to unlock. There's more to it than what it might seem like on the surface. So, for me, I can put all those things together, and that's a little bit of the creative direction that we're following here right now, is trying to build an experience that plays really well, that's designed for the interface and device of touch, not ported from a dual stick, console interface that has great production value and has a lot of depth.
So I'm assuming Industrial Toys is currently working on a project. Would that be a correct assumption?
Nah, we're painting the walls and drinking cocktails every Wednesday. Yes, we are in fact working on a game.
Is there anything you can say about it? Being the head of the company.
Well, we're not ready to start talking about the game yet. Maybe one thing that I can say is that I meet a lot of developers, which is always great because lots of people do things differently. I always learn a lot when I go and visit another studio and see how people are doing things. The one thing I would say, which really isn't much about the game, it's so much about the team, which is this team is awesome. I've worked with a lot of development teams before, and this is probably just a side effect of the fact that I'm old. But I'm for the first time I've got a chance to work with a group of folks that I've known for 20 years, and so like I know these guys, I trust these guys. They know what they're doing, and so the stuff that we are prototyping and playing already is just really good. So we have kind of a bit of a shorthand in the way that we communicate with each other, and we don't have like a crazy process that's overlaid on top because it's still small. So I'm very optimistic that folks will be excited about what we're building. I feel like we do have a bit of a dream team. That we're kind of bringing a rocket launcher to a knife fight in a sense that we're bringing a lot of firepower to a mobile game, and we're doing it because we think there's an opportunity to make something really cool and to stand out by going after those things I was talking about. The really great mechanics and the depth and the production value. That's for me that's super exciting. I'm having a freaking blast.
That's always good. So how different is the game development process now compared to back when you were doing it? I mean, like, do you ever miss packaging the games and shipping them yourself, like for Operation Desert Storm?
Well, there is something to the physicality of a product, and the making that, and then even as a consumer getting it and opening it. There definitely is something to that. But in some ways things are very similar. In some ways, we just know a lot more now, so we kind of we get to spend some of that experimenting time on other things other than the structural stuff that we've done so many times. The one area that I think is very different now than it was in the past is that because what we're building a digital product that does not conform to a preset business model like hey, it's going to sell at GameStop for $60. I mean, that's the business, right? So you design the content, and you're done. Because we're not doing that, because we are in fact designing a business model, a business at the same time we're designing a game. That is very different, and that's an area where I've done a bit of study with different teams about what the various approaches are doing that. And so I've seen teams that design their game, and then at the very end, they try to figure out whether they're going to sell it for $2.99 or whether it's going to be free and you'll get to buy things in the game or whatever. I've seen that approach, which tends to make a traditional game that doesn't make any money. And then I've seen the approach of, hey, well, let's design this business model. It's going to work like a gumball machine where you put your quarter in, you get a random character, and then you play with that character, and then this is what the game is. So I've seen that approach, which tends to make money and decently, but the games are not really that good. Certainly not the kind of games that we're trying to build. So it's very different now, but you have to consider what that business model is and where to put that thought and design in the process. So we sort of treat it the same way we treat any area of development where two disciplines butt up against each other. It's like, we had a conversation this morning about AI character design. What comes first? Do you draw a picture of a character, or do you design the behavior of the character? And in reality, you have to plan for some requirements, but ultimately what you want to do is you want to do some of that work in parallel, because you want one discipline to influence the other and back and forth. So you want the designer to challenge the artist, and you want the artist to challenge the designer, and hopefully that back and forth as you develop to a result makes the end result better. So we're sort of taking a similar approach with building the business around the product as we're doing some of that in parallel. But that is a fundamental difference in game development today than it was even just 2-3 years ago.
What are your current views on the gaming industry?
Well, it's funny, I get asked that question a lot, and I'm not sure I've ever given an answer other than this is the greatest time to be making games. And I totally believe that right now is definitely the greatest time to be making games. And I think really that's just the result of the audience for games, like people playing games. It keeps going up. And, the kids that are getting into playing games today, like my son, are the children of folks that were playing video games when they were young. So, I grew up playing video games, and now my kids are growing up playing video games, and I'm playing games with them. Like I'm watching my 7-year-old totally womp all over Super Mario Brothers. I'm like, oh my gosh, that blows my mind. And that trend just seems to be continuing, and I think that just makes it more and more interesting to be in the business right now, because it's more visible. You can have conversations with more and more people about what you do, and they sort of understand it and care. But you also get a much wider and diverse, groups of people that might play your games. So it gives you a lot more things to think about. I think my views on the game industry are very bullish.
Well, you said you've been asked that question a lot. Well, how about this then? What about the gaming industry makes you think yeah, they got it right, they're doing good, and what makes you just pissed off?
Well, okay. Well, so as far as things that I'm excited about, that I really like, is that there is really a world to explore in gaming right now. And I don't mean you can make a game with a cool world. I mean there are lots and lots of games out, and you can get a game like Journey that comes out on the PS3, which is awesome. And without digital distribution and a flexible game format, does that kind of game see the light of day? No, I don't think so. And especially with indie games that you got right now, and even just we started going over to USC to meet the students in the game program over there. Just the fact that there is a game program over there, and that the kids that are going through it are building games in Unreal, they're building games in Unity, and they know stuff. When I was in college, there was nothing like that. Those are all signs of hey, that is great, that is good stuff. Maybe some of the I don't really want to talk bad about anyone, but just the one thing that does sort of frustrate me a little bit is that there is a category of games that really aren't games so much. They're really more analytics driven interfaces that are designed to entrap people in following patterns on their devices, and those patterns lead to spending money on things that don't really enrich a person's experience. So without naming names, those kinds of games I've never been a customer or a fan of them. And while I think they're good because they bring more people into the market, I worry sometimes that they sort of give the wrong impression of what games really games really are, because games aren't just about clicking stuff um, and that games are more about learning. You learn a lot from games. I mean, I don't mean educational games, but I mean you go through an experience in a game and you get enriched because you learn you learn something about patterns, you learn something about timing, you learn something about a story, or you connect with a friend and you compete or you cooperate, and those experiences are all dynamic and enriching. And the games that are not about those things they're less interesting to me.
So will we ever see a sequel to GNOP or Operation Desert Storm or any of the other games you worked on, quote unquote, back in the day?
Well, gee, the games that old, maybe not. I'm not sure. I can tell you right now we're focused on something entirely new. But who knows?
Is there anything you'd like to say to the fans out there of your work?
Thanks for playing the games. I hope you continue to enjoy them. Would love to. We're trying to build a great relationship with gamers. We don't have a game out yet at Industrial Toys, but we certainly always love to hear what people are looking for, just general ideas. So if anybody wants to, hit us up on our Facebook, which is just Facebook Industrial Toys, or on our Twitter, send us a note. We're always listening.
Any tips for any young hopefuls out there looking to get into the gaming industry?
Yeah, definitely. So, the advice I always give is to really just jump in. Whether you're interested in programming, doing art, or design, there are now lots of great tools out there that are free that you can get. You can just start experimenting and playing around. Just like if you want to be a screenwriter, you should start writing. If you want to be an artist, the more you draw, the better. Same thing with games. If you want to get into making games, start experimenting with the craft and find other people like you that want to do that. And that's really that's really my advice. And for kids today, those options go well beyond just finding stuff and downloading it online. A lot of high schools have programs to get into understanding game development. Certainly, a lot of colleges do. I taught at DePaul University in their game program. They got a great program over there. USC's got a great game program. A lot of universities do. Seek out the tools and seek out people that share your interests, and just start building.
All right. So before we close out, is there anything else you'd like to say or rant about or anything like that?
No, I don't have a rant on my mind that I need to at this moment. But check back in soon.
All right. Well, everybody, since you're already here, you might as well check out our YouTube channel. And be sure to visit our site, TinkTink.org, for all of your gaming needs. And be sure to check out the Industrial Toys website to see what they're up to. And special thanks to our guest, Mr. Alex Seropian, for talking with us today. This has been Josh Wilson, and as always, thanks for listening to TinkTink.org interviews.